Mr. James E. Badolato was born to the parents of Joseph and Delphine Badolato on May 8, 1978. He grew up with his two older brothers, Michael and Christopher. As a teenager, he was employed as a Ford detailer for cars and was also a plumber's assistant. After completing high school, Mr. Badolato began thinking of career options. He always knew that college wasn't an option and didn't want to bounce between jobs for the rest of his life. As a solution, he enlisted in the armed forces. After finishing 4 years of his service, Mr. Badolato planned on joining the Pennsylvania State Police. However, he ended up serving for almost 13 and a half years. During his time in the armed forces, James Badolato served in the Air Force. When asked why he chose this branch, Mr. Badolato replied by saying,
"Because they're the best, and anybody that says different is lying."
To be a part of the Air Force, he first had to go through basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. This was a rigorous 6 or so weeks that consisted of a lot of running, waking up early, and getting yelled at by instructors. These instructors did this just to further enforce the purpose of basic training. This purpose was mainly learning to follow rules and pay attention to detail. For example, if two beds were supposed to be 18 inches apart and they were a half inch off, Mr. Badolato would have been scolded by his instructors. This would have applied to every other trainee. In basic training, everyone was treated equally and an instructor never gave anyone special treatment. After basic training came specialized training for Mr. Badolato. The training that he chose to specialize in was explosive ordnance disposal, also known as the bomb squad. This training was completed at the Medina Annex, and Mr. Badolato furthered his training for 7 months at the Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. For Mr. Badolato and the other trainees attending, this training was different. Not only were they with other Air Force men, but also other branches. A notable example that Mr. Badolato recollects is the fact that his leader and non-commissioned officer were from 2 different branches of the military. As for what was done at EOD school, Mr. Badolato learned to properly detonate or take apart bombs. Unfortunately, he failed one single test and was ruled out of school. This may seem like a bad thing, but this led Mr. Badolato into a different specialized field. Once in the military, Mr. Badolato had to adapt to military life. He says,
"Adapting to military life is surprisingly simple. All you have to do is exactly what you're told when you're told to do it."
A major difference from home was the food for Mr. Badolato. He said that food in the Air Force was much better than that in the Navy or Marines, but he still had to put hot sauce on everything. Most of the time, chicken and rice was served, and that was his only option. When it came to the social aspect for Mr. Badolato, he compared joining the military to starting high school. His comparison was,
The social aspect of it was kind of like your first day at high school. Some people you knew because you went to middle school with them. But there might be a whole bunch of other people that you had never met before that went to a different middle school. But now you're all in the same place, doing the exact same thing, trying to reach the exact same goal. So you have to work together. And you make friends.
Of course, he made friends while in the military, but Mr. Badolato also needed to connect with family and friends from home. Each person was given 2 15-minute phone calls per week. Care packages and letters were also sent back and forth. If someone received a care package, like the 17-pound one sent to Mr. Badolato by his parents, they took out what they wanted and shared everything else with their friends. When it came to friends on base, Mr. Badolato became good friends with 2 people by the names of Matt and George, both of which he still keeps in contact with. As for recreation on the base, Mr. Badolato says,
You really don't have much to do besides go to work, go to the gym, and sleep.
Obviously, they have recreation centers that have pool tables, ping pong tables, card games, and other activities similar to those. There are also TVs, but no one was able to choose the station. This different field of training was security forces. After failing to pass the explosive ordnance disposal training, Mr. Badolato was put into the security forces. Although this seemed like a downside, this opportunity helped him to further his aspiration of joining the Pennsylvania State Police.
The duties of the military police is very closely related to the duties of the state police, so this put him in a good position for the future.
These duties may seem simple and unimportant, but in the long run, they all add up to be a very important job. Mr. Badolato's first duty as a security forceman was to serve as a gate guard. This gave him the responsibility of checking IDs and allowing the entrance of people onto the base. From here, he became a patrolman. His duty then was to drive around base and enforce the laws or arrest those who were disobeying it. From here, a person would move on to become a desk sergeant, flight chief, and continue to move up the line from there. Eventually, Mr. Badolato worked his way up to the flyaway security team. The duty that Mr. Badolato had to uphold while a part of this team was to provide security for airplanes or helicopters. If the Army or Marines captured someone, the flyaway security team would fly a C-130 out to transport the prisoner. These prisoners were not captured in very safe, secure areas, therefore Mr. Badolato would fly out with his 4-member team to bring the prisoners back to a prison.
His duties as part of the flyaway security team took place while in Oman and Afghanistan. However, Mr. Badolato was stationed elsewhere too. His first deployment was in 2001, and this was when he was stationed in Oman. Next, he was stationed in Afghanistan. From here, he was deployed in Iraq twice, the United Arab Emirates once, and he was fortunate enough to be stationed in Curacao for 6 months. While not stationed overseas, Mr. Badolato was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. Although his duties as flyaway security team member took place in Oman and Afghanistan, Mr. Badolato helped to impact another cause.
This cause that he impacted was the global war on terror. Mr. Badolato described his wartime service as something that was just a constant struggle with terrorism that every soldier fought. James Badolato recalled a time during his service when he was out on a special mission to do security on a plane transferring John Walker Lynn. Before being assigned this mission, he had heard about this news on CNN. As he was watching, James received a call from higher personnel in the flyaway security team, telling him that he would in fact be the one to do security for this mission. Mr. Badolato described the mission by saying,
So everybody knew we were coming. They knew where we were going to go and approximately when we were going to be there. It was the worst trip we had because everybody knew we were coming. That made it extremely difficult to do our jobs.
Returning home from overseas for Mr. Badolato was a joyful time. He was able to reconnect with family members that were all happy to see him once again, and go to parties celebrating his return.
He retired in August of 2011. Mr. Badolato thought that readjusting to civilian life after being in the Air Force for such a long time was tough. What he means by this is that everybody in the military has the same roles, compared to civilians who tend to put themselves upon pedestals. James has not joined any veterans organizations since retirement.
Mr. Badolato enjoyed a lot of different activities while in the military, especially range day, where soldiers go to the range and practice shooting. His main struggle whilst being in the Air Force was that he does not like being told what to do if he already understands the way a task is being done.
Mr. Badolato still uses the life lessons he learned from being in the Air Force today. He tries to fix problems as soon as they are introduced to prevent it from happening again, rather than wondering why the problem is present. The concept that stuck with Mr. Badolato the most is that
15 minutes early is on time. If you're just on time, you're already late. Apply that to everything in your life.
through using this technique, he learned that people can show others the commitment they have for the tasks they are completing. Through the military as well, Mr. Badolato discovered that war will always be necessary when there is a difference that cannot be compromised.
After separating from the military, Mr. Badolato received an internship, and ever since then, he has had that job. He still misses being in the armed forces, including missing the people he worked with and the tasks he completed. However, he does not miss the abnormal schedule.
The message that Mr. Badolato sends to everyone is to give the military a shot. Through all the statements one hears about the military, They should look to this opportunity with an open mind because the military will teach them many important lessons. His words were,
It teaches you things that apply to everything you're going to do for the rest of your life. And without joining the military, you can't recreate that in any other way.
In 2011, Mr. Badolato received an honorary medical discharge due to a severe ankle problem. He served in the United States Air Force for a total of 13 years and 7 months. Since retiring, he completed schooling and now works as a full-time IT. He currently resides in Cherry Hill, New Jersey with his wife and daughter.